Hello, everyone. Well, I am Siddharth Dikshit. I am a consultant in the glaucoma and cataract services at the LV Prasada Institute, Hyderabad, and I am in charge of the residents at the LV Prasada Institute. I have no financial interest. So this presentation and this talk is going to be about my experience over the years, a decade into glaucoma practice and surgery, and how I think I can reach a goal of having a bleb like this with everything being in the perfect place. Like religion, glaucoma, success in glaucoma surgery is also, it can be reached through multiple paths. So I at no point want to state that what I have learned and have adopted in my practice is the only way to go ahead. But I will try to explain to you why I do what I do. Now, irrespective of who the surgeon is, when you do a trabeculectomy, you want to look at a patient who has an intraocular pressure of 10, 12 millimeters of mercury without any medications from day 1 to 10 years, and why not beyond it? And this is the ideal thing that we want. Not does not happen all the time, but happens quite often for us to keep us motivated and on the job. What you don't want any complications. You don't want even a hyphema or a uveitis. But let us concentrate on complications that are sight-threatening and can cause irreversible vision loss or failure of surgery or a need for a repeat surgery. Things like a suprachoroidal hemorrhage, a wipeout, meaning the patient loses the entire residual visual acuity immediately after the surgery, a bleb leak, blebitis, endophthalmitis from a thin cystic bleb will need a lot of intensive care and possibly repeat surgery or surgeries, and a failed bleb. So this is not what we want. And the root cause or a common cause of the top 3 complications listed here is hypotony. And while we are doing a trabeculectomy, we want to counter hypotony by countering the extent of hypotony, the suddenness of hypotony, and the duration of hypotony. More is the extent, suddenness, and duration, more likely are we to meet these complications that we definitely don't want to meet. So let us see how during our surgery or during the journey to the surgery and while performing the surgery can we avoid these complications. While the journey to the surgery actually begins before the surgery, and I cannot undermine the importance of what we are going to do before the surgery, but I will keep it brief and concentrate on a few specific things. If I'm going to operate on a patient with a visual field like this, or on 10-2 or on macular program, you know this is advanced glaucoma. And these patients have a very sensitive eye and a risk for higher complications like wipeout or have very little tolerance for fluctuation of intraocular pressure. In these patients, it is best to reduce the intraocular pressure as much as possible preoperatively for a sustained amount of time, because the physiology or the natural vasculature of the choroid, which can lead to many complications, takes time to adjust. So just giving mannitol an hour prior to the surgery may not help as much as prolonged and sustained pre-op control would. Now we are operating because the pressure is not under control. So this is a little counterproductive to talk about, but control it as much as you can. Don't leave the patient on just one medication because you are anyway going to do a surgery. Use acetazolamide, use glycerol syrup, and try to get it under control as much as possible till the time of surgery. And on the day of surgery for advanced glaucoma, irrespective of the intraocular pressure control, I use pre-op IV mannitol, which I give at least 1 hour before surgery so that it has maximum effect when I start operating and incise the eye. As we have identified people with risk of wipeout, we should identify people who are at risk for suprachoroidal hemorrhages. I can remember one patient very clearly whenever I see this term suprachoroidal hemorrhage written anywhere. She was an obese lady with hypertension, hyperlipidemia, atherosclerosis, sleep apnea syndrome. She was breathless to sit down, and because of the systemic complications was on anticoagulants. And that lady just reminds me of all these risk factors. So what do? You try to control as many risk factors as you can. While it is possible in some patients to stop the anticoagulants in advance, please do so. If not, then we have to just bite the bullet and go forward. Control the blood pressure to something below 140 and 90 millimeters of mercury if possible, and use IV mannitol preoperatively. Now, there are situations where hypotony is not only more likely to happen, but either has a prolonged course towards resolution or can have multiple complications. So this is a list of situations where you should try to avoid hypotony to the best possible extent. And though this may not be complete, these are the most important and common conditions which you usually would meet while operating on a patient for trabeculectomy. When you start the surgery, there are certain things which are very, very important, very small things, like giving a patient a bathroom break prior to the surgery. A patient who has the urge to urinate because of a full bladder will continuously squeeze the eye and cause the intraocular pressure to rise. A heavy speculum will do the same, and large volume of intraocular local anesthetic is also best avoided. So far we have seen identifying patients, controlling systemic factors. A good pre-op intraocular pressure control can control a lot of things. Now, when you are planning a surgery like a trabeculectomy, you also think of where are you going to do it. Now, various surgeons have preferences, and over the years, I have tried multiple things. And my firm belief is that a superior bleb is the one that has the maximum area to spread into, and the kind of diffuseness and the mere size of the bleb that you can achieve with the superior trab doesn't happen that much with the superonasal or superotemporal trabs. And if you take good care of the conch, it is still possible to do a repeat trab either superotemporally or superonasally, depending on which eye you are talking about. And I have not found it, though I have had a very few patients where I had to do another surgery, but haven't had any problems after performing a superior trabeculectomy. Before diving into the surgery, we have to look at how you can prevent the pain happening to the eye. It's very important that the patient cooperates well and is without pain. Now, while we have a myriad of options, it must be remembered that both a larger volume of the peribulbar block and compression to reduce the chemosis that you happen to have because of the peribulbar block reduce supply to the optic nerve. And this itself can cause wipeout. And wipeout may not be just reduction to PL negative status. Significant visual loss can also sometimes be a partial wipeout kind of phenomenon, which you can avoid by taking certain precautions, and reducing the amount of anesthesia that you give to the eye is a very important part of that. And I typically prefer to do away with the peribulbar block completely. And I typically use a combination of topical and subcutaneous anesthesia with xylocaine that is preservative free. I give it even before the draping has started, and I use a 29 gauge needle. Go to the posterior most part possible, use a 29 gauge needle, enter an area where there is no blood vessel. Now that swab is not only keeping the lid away, but it can also be used to diffusely spread the anesthetic agent throughout the area that you're going to operate. Now, just topical agent is not sufficient because you are going to incise the conjunctiva and you're also going to perform cautery in that area. So some kind of anesthesia within the ocular structures is required. What happens if we don't give this anesthesia before the draping? Now, this is a patient where I had given a block after the draping, and you typically end up with a boggy swollen conjunctiva, which is difficult to handle. Whereas if you do that before the draping, it is not only the amount of time that has passed away, but also the lid closure probably helps in spreading and giving a very good flat conj, as if there was nothing injected under the conj ever. And that gives much more easier handling to the conjunctiva. So as far as the block is concerned, using minimal volume or a topical block is the way to go ahead. If you have to give a block, a peribulbar block, it is best to use a very low volume like 3 to 4 ml and inject it inferotemporally. Any anesthesia peribulbar block that is given superonasally or medially is more likely to cause chemosis and raised intraorbital pressure, which is not good for the blood supply to the optic nerve. Now, this is very important, especially when someone is in a learning stage. I'm not talking about exposure to any virus or anything, but only of the area that you're going to operate on. And while there are multiple ways of doing it, like the corneal traction suture with the 6-0 Vicryl or a superior rectus traction suture, I haven't taken any of these for 99% of my cases for many years. What I use is something I call a rotational grip. So if you see this video, I'm using a Hoskins forceps to hold the posterior tenon sclera complex and just going inside the eye and rotating it forward gives you an excellent exposure. The way to do it is to reach the posterior most extent that you can, press a little hard on the sclera so that you can catch the tissue. And if you look carefully, I'm almost at the insertion of the medial rectus, a superior rectus. So this exposure should be as good as that of a superior rectus traction suture without a needle. So to enhance the reach or access of the instrument to the posterior part of the sclera, you can just lift the conj with a crescent or an iris repositor or any other instrument so that your toothed or non-toothed forceps has a good access to the posterior sclera, and you can achieve a good anterior rotation without incision. Now, there are situations where you have to take a traction suture, especially if the globe is very tight or the patient doesn't cooperate well and you have taken the patient under surgery for under topical anesthesia. I typically use a 6-0 Vicryl for that. And this is a step that you should perform under high magnification. The depth of this suture should be almost 90%. And if you look carefully here, I am zooming in because this I thought had touched the desmus, and I am almost at the 90% depth of the cornea, and I'm going along that, and you possibly, if the resolution is good, can see some folds appearing on the desmus there. So I've not punctured the desmus, but I'm really at that depth, and this should prevent us from tearing the cornea with our suture. A finer suture like the 8-0 Vicryl is much more likely to tear through the cornea. So a 6-0 Vicryl is an ideal suture, but if you are careful and you don't really pull too hard, an 8-0 Vicryl will also do. So the same suture can be used for conjunctival suturing later on. I don't know why each video is playing twice, but anyway. Now, if you have to operate, you have to reach the area of surgery, and the peritomy or conjunctival peritomy or the conjunctival opening is the way to go ahead. And I like to do a fornix-based flap. So the incision is at the limbus. But even before we talk about the incision and the conjunctival opening, we must know how to handle the conjunctiva. Now, this video will show you how to hold the conjunctiva through the tenons. So you can use a second instrument and fold the conjunctiva over so that you can hold it from inside out, especially in such a patient where the conjunctiva is very thin, and take care that you don't cause too much pull on the conjunctiva. So hold the conjunctiva at every possible opportunity from the tenon side. Tenons is a much stronger tissue, and if you are careful, this will help you avoid many conjunctival buttonholes. It is also important to use blunt tooth forceps. So there are many non-tooth forceps, but what is commonly available and what we use at our center is a Pierce-Hoskin forceps, where the tooth are blunt and is much more unlikely to cause tears on the conjunctiva when compared to a sharp tooth limbs or a tissue holding forceps. So my strong recommendation for surgeons, especially if you are beginning, is to use a non-tooth or a blunt tooth forceps. Which a non-tooth forceps, you need to have some experience to be able to grasp the conjunctiva. So as I told you, the fornix-based incision is at the limbus, but what is important here, why the word limbus is in capital letters, is because the incision should be really at the limbus. Now let us see what I mean. So you can see here that I'm using a Vannas forceps in the right hand and a Pierce-Hoskin forceps in the left hand to make an incision that is located right at the limbus. Why do I want the incision to be right at the limbus? Because that is the area where the healing will happen maximally. So the limbus is the site of all the stem cells, and that is why the healing at the limbus will happen in the best possible manner. If you look at this video, this has greater details of how to make sure that you have inside the tenons also, which was not, the last patient did not have too much of a tenon tissue. So what you need to do here, I'll just pause this and show you the fold on conjunctiva. So you have to lift the conjunctiva very close to the limbus in such a manner that you get a fold radiating right from the limbus, and then you start the incision with a with a Vannas scissors. A conjunctival scissors may make a notch here, which may be difficult to close. So you see here, you have no notch or a relaxing incision at this side. So you constantly see this V-shaped fold, and that is enough for you to make an incision without making a relaxing incision. What I'm trying to do now is to make an opening into the tenon so I can get access to the subtenon space. And now I can go on to a conjunctival scissors, create space under the conch for the scissors, and make an incision at the limbus. How do you make sure that this incision is at the limbus? Is by keeping the scissors flat at the limbus and not let the lower blade rise above the surface while you are pushing the conjunctiva or the limbal conjunctiva towards the cornea. So that will make sure that you make an incision with no free or frill of conjunctiva at the limbus, and that, I believe, enhances the healing of the limbal incision. So just to show how by putting a pressure or pulling the conjunctiva down, you can ensure that the incision is exactly at the limbus where I believe it would heal the best, without scanning the conjunctiva posterior to it. Now, contrast this with an incision that you would typically use for a manual SICS. I'm not sure how many of you would actually be doing manual SICS, but a traditional incision that we were taught and SICS for trabeculectomy and for SICS was very similar. So here you pull the conch up and create a large fold that is slightly behind the limbus, and you go right through it. So the way you hold the conjunctiva to create this linear fold is also slightly different. I'll just play this from the beginning so that you can see it well. So go slightly posterior to the tissue, which is not adherent to the limbus. The anterior 2 mm of the conch is well adherent to the sclera. So that is what you avoid in this kind of an incision, but you include that, or in fact initiate your incision right there when you're doing and making an incision without a relaxing component. So you see the conjunctiva is held quite anterior, and you are using a very small scissors to make this incision so that there is no component for which you will require a suture posteriorly. Now you might be wondering why I am going on about this incision and not making a relaxing incision. What I will tell you is, one, if you can have the rotational grip or a good traction suture, your exposure is not compromised, and you will not need to place a suture that you would otherwise need to place for a relaxing incision. So a relaxing incision means that you need to suture this separately, and you have, whenever you have a suture, there are certain things which come with it. So you typically use an absorbable suture. Even if you have used a nylon suture for the limbal incision, for a horizontal relaxing incision like this, you typically use a Vicryl, a horizontal mattress suture, and that is a problem for me. Why is it a problem? If you look at this bleb, it is a very vascular bleb, no doubt about it. But do you see where there is maximum density of the vessels? It is in this area, and this is the area where you have the Vicryl sutures. Any absorbable suture that can absorb fluid and whatever is around the tissue is likely to attract vasculature. And not only that, being an absorbable suture, there is a possibility that it can give way a week or two into the post-operative period. And what you see here, that this horizontal mattress suture has become loose, and this part of the incision has given way. Now, why is the vasculature bad? Because once you have vasculature, once you have cellular infiltration, it is a precursor to fibrosis. So having no absorbable suture posterior to your incision line will help you reduce the amount of vascularity that you are seeing in the bleb in the post-operative period. So no relaxing incision is likely to reduce the amount of fibrosis you are going to see in a bleb. Now, this might be a slightly controversial thing. Just give me a moment. Really sorry. I don't know who's, not my mobile, but someone's mobile that rang. Now, while it is important to minimize the amount of cautery that you do, it is also important to keep your field of surgery clean. And any amount of bleeding into that area is not something that is going to help you while you're doing the surgery. So we typically use a bipolar cautery. I keep the settings to the minimum possible level where you can achieve a cautery. The key is that after you have performed the cautery, the tissue should remain white and there should be no brown color that you should be able to see. And if you look carefully, I am cauterizing the vessels. I am not cauterizing the sclera, and I'm cauterizing only the vessels. And also in the areas where I'm likely to hold it, it is debatable, in my opinion, whether bleeding will cause more fibrosis or cautery will cause more fibrosis and inflammation in the post-operative period. So I like to keep the area of surgery clean. And if you compare the appearance of this sclera before the cautery began and now, you will not see any brownish coloration of the sclera, and that is what the endpoint of cautery should be. So minimum cautery is likely to prevent vascularity and fibrosis by preventing the amount of bleeding that you have. Now, do not forget the step that I see postgraduates missing most when they talk about steps of trabeculectomy is subconjunctival dissection. And I think the importance of this is very underestimated and understated. So what do you mean by subconjunctival dissection? Once you have made the peritomy, you need to go posterior and open up the subcon space superonasally and superotemporally on either side of the superior rectus. Don't go over the superior rectus, it may damage the muscle pulleys, but definitely do go on either side of the superior rectus. You will go and dissect the areas that you want your bleb to form in. You don't want your bleb to go sideways, so leave that area immediately adjacent perilimbal subconj area, but you go and dissect the areas superonasal and superotemporal. And it's important to take care that you don't enlarge the opening while you are doing the subconjunctival dissection. How you can make sure of that? While you go in with a closed scissors. When you are inside and the fulcrum of the scissors is near the incision, you open it wide. It will dissect the posterior subconjunctival space while not disturbing the incision. And while you are coming out, close the scissors again. So that will keep your incision from extending. So subconjunctival dissection is likely to determine the area of your bleb, at least in the long term, and is likely to prevent an anterior localization of the bleb. Excuse me. So while every other factor is important, we all glaucoma surgeons believe that the scleral flap, the kind of flap, the size of the flap, is the most important determinant of the trabeculectomy. And I like to make a scleral flap that is rectangular in shape. I make a 5 into 4 millimeter flap. I use a crescent to shape the same. And the reason why I use a crescent is because it's the sharpest instrument in the operation theater, and a sharper instrument is more likely to give us good control over the incision than a blunt instrument. So once the incision is made, you also dissect the flap with the same instrument, preventing the need for an additional instrument. And you will notice that this the crescent knife is just visible. So this gives you a half thickness scleral flap when you can just manage to see the edges of the sclera. And a rectangular flap is much more likely to give you a posteriorly directed flow, which can also be achieved through a large triangular flap where the incision does not reach the limbus. So the incision not reaching the limbus and designing the flap and sutures in such a way that the flow is directed posteriorly is very important for preventing an anterior bleb and achieve a diffuse bleb. For the same reasons, mitomycin, though infamous, is our most important instrument in countering fibrosis. And we must ensure that the application of mitomycin is made over a wide area. We use surgical sponges soaked in mitomycin and place it to as much posterior extent as possible, as suggested by Sir Pencaw. And this is the area where you want your bleb to form, and this is the area that you should irrigate with mitomycin or apply mitomycin. It's important to irrigate also after you have applied for the duration that you want. I typically use 2-minute 0.04% strength for 2 minutes, 3 minutes for situations where we have a high risk of fibrosis. Now, before I go and make the ostium, I pre-place the sutures, which means that I place the nylon sutures over the scleral flap in advance. So one fixed suture and one loop releasable is ready to be taken right before the incision is made. Why this is important? This is important to reduce the duration of hypotony that you are likely to meet after you have made the incision. So the duration of hypotony is minimized by using pre-placed sutures and paracentesis. The paracentesis also helps us in reducing the suddenness of hypotony. So while you are making a long partial entry on the cornea, you try to leak some fluid out, and after placing the sutures, you make the entry. So the paracentesis serves three purposes. One, it allows you to reduce the pressure inside the eye. Second, gives you an opportunity to form the anterior chamber, thus reducing the duration of hypotony, and it enables you to perform what is called the titration. The crux of trabeculectomy is making a sclerostomy or the ostium, which I do with a Kelly's Desmaze punch, and I incise the entire length of the 4mm flap, reform the AC as required, and I use a 1 square millimeter punch, 100 microns, and take 1.5 bites. Because the incision is not reaching the sclera, it may sometimes be difficult to visualize or catch the ostium in the camera. After the of making the ostium, in our population, we think it's essential to perform iridectomy. So we had a surgeon who was in Canada for a long time, was not doing iridectomies for her patients. But when she came and started not doing iridectomies, she repeatedly found the iris going and blocking the ostium. So probably there is something in the nature of brown eyes which tend to have thicker, more floppy iris, and that can go and block the ostium. So while the assistant holds the flap, just pull out the iris immediately below the ostium, and it should be as wide as the ostium. So very often you may not be able to even see the peripheral surgical iridectomy that you make after making a small ostium. Now, this is something that I learned from Dr. Paul Palmberg, and for me, it was a game changer. So what happens in titration is, before you close the suture, you just lock the knots. So the knots, there are 3 throws, and then you lock it like you would do in a corneal suture. The loop releasable is also closed, and a central loop releasable is placed again. So what happens here is that you get an idea of what the equilibrium point of this surgery is. So you have to you don't want to ensure that there is a flow happening. What you want to see is at the point of time when this flow stops, which is the physical equilibrium or the point of time when this flow would stop, and then touch the cornea gently with an iris repositor. You should be able to just indent the cornea without making any folds. If you have to apply force to indent the cornea, then it means that the pressure is slightly high. So the flow has stopped here, and I touch the cornea and you see a mild indentation there. For me, this is a pressure of somewhere between 10 to 14. And by using this technique, if you see a tighter globe, you loosen the sutures. If you see a globe that is not well formed, you tighten the sutures and then do the test again. So for me, titration and use of releasables is a must to be able to avoid hypotony. And then coming on to a step which I think is very, very important, because you don't want your bleb to leak. So the technique that I now use is that of a buried 80 Vicryl. So what you can see here is contrary to what the traditional teaching has been. The first bite is taken from inside out, and the second bite is taken in such a manner that it pulls and catches a part of the conjunctiva and pulls it down to the limbus. So what happens here is that with one suture, if you don't have a relaxing incision, you can pull one side of the conjunctiva entirely down, and using a similar suture, you can get a very secure closure by typical wing sutures. The great part of this technique is once you put these loose ends under the conch, these will not come out. And with the loop releasable and this technique of suturing, you don't have any suture on the surface, which typically collects a lot of mucus and invites inflammation in the post-operative period. While it is important to perform the surgery correctly, it is also very important to take care of the patients post-operatively by multiple techniques. I think that can be an issue that we can deal with in a separate class completely. But to summarize, it's very important to identify patients who are at higher risk of suprachoroidal hemorrhages, wipeout, control the systemic factors and preoperative intraocular pressure. Use topical plus subconjunctival anesthesia while you can. If you have to give peribulbar block, use a low volume anesthesia inferotemporally, preferably without adrenaline. To prevent the duration and extent of hypotony, use a paracentesis and pre-placed sutures. Titrate to prevent post-operative hypotony. By preventing hypotony, you can eliminate the chances of suprachoroidal hemorrhages and wipeout to the extent possible. For getting a posteriorly directed bleb, it is important to have a posterior flow using a large rectangular or triangular flap with the incision not reaching the limbus and wide area mitomycin C. Subconjunctival dissection and releasables will help you counter fibrosis in the post-operative period. I'll be very happy to answer any questions. I think there are quite a questions. Right. The first questions are why trabeculectomy numbers are reducing year after year. Actually, you see trabeculectomy numbers are reducing only at places where mix is paid for by the insurance companies. You look the world over, it is not reducing everywhere. And there are certain advantages that mix have when you want to replace one drug, which is not usually the goal of trabeculectomy. If you look at MIGS, most of them will give you an intraocular pressure of 18 to 20 millimeters of mercury, which is much higher than what you get with a trabeculectomy. So if you have an advanced glaucoma, especially that is not open angle, MIGS are not an option. So there you have to do a trabeculectomy. For milder glaucomas, where you will be happy to just reduce the pressure by 3-4 millimeters or eliminate one drug, MIGS are a very good option. Advantages of a V-shaped flap over the traditional rectangular. It depends on where you come from. I saw most of the trabs being performed with a triangular or a V-shaped incision initially. The thought that Sir Penkhaw has propagated, and I believe in that the rectangular flap is more likely to give you a posterior flow. The mechanics is such that if you can recall the diagram, the rectangular flap with the draining part being much more posterior is much more likely to give you a posterior flow. While I try to answer the other questions, what I will do is I will leave you with that diagram and answer the next question. Now, using a single sponge is something that we are not very comfortable with because it is very difficult to ensure a posterior and uniform reach with a single sponge. Multiple sponges, especially those that are placed posteriorly, is more likely to give you a posterior spread. Saurav is asking, we go subcons, we don't use cautery. So what about tenons? Should we not remove tenons? Tenonectomy used to be a standard practice in previous era when mitomycin was not there. We really need the tenons for a good bleb in the post-operative period. Cautery, without cautery, I think I would find it very difficult to visualize the sclera well. And I think it's dangerous. It might not be very safe for the healing of the bleb and not ending up in a thin cystic bleb. Injectable mitomycin, I think let us just wait. We need to wait for longer follow-ups. There is a paper from Europe which showed that within a year of injectable mitomycin, 20% of blebs turn thin cystic. So I think over a period of time, we will know whether it is actually safe. A recent paper by Paul Palmberg et al. Showed equal intraocular pressures and bleb characteristics. And this was published in Ophthalmology. The intraocular pressure was same in patients who received an injectable mitomycin C versus compared to those who were treated with mitomycin sponges. So I really don't see much of an advantage, except that you save those 2 minutes or 3 minutes during the surgery. How large should I consider my triangular flap? I don't do triangulars. I do a 4 into 5 millimeter rectangular flap. Technique, I will not go into combined surgery. I think it's a completely different thing. How do you titrate the suture? Okay. Now this is something I'll just try to rush to the slide where I was showing titration. Now, if you want to understand titration, imagine an eye that is there, say 2, 3, 4, 5 days after a trabeculectomy. Now, what will decide how much is the pressure of the eye? The factors that are going to decide the intraocular pressure is the relation between the scleral flap size, the apposition that the flap has with the bed, the tightness of the sutures, and fibrosis. Now, fibrosis is not something that you can control entirely. What you can control very well is the tightness of the sutures. Now, if you see here, this is while I am titrating. I think this is very important to understand, slightly more difficult. So if you take, if you just lock the sutures, like you square the knot and leave the knot untied. So 3 throws, pull, and then just leave it like that. And the loop releasable on the corner being closed. And what you see here is by this technique, you will see very shortly, I fill the eye, you will see a pouting sclera here. So what it means is that there is a good amount of aqueous under the sclera. So there is a good aqueous lake that will form, and the sclera will not appose completely. It's very important that the aqueous reaches the subflap scleral lake, and then only it can go into the bleb. Now, the tightness of the sutures is not going to change ever on its own till you take off the releasables, do a suturolysis. So whatever is the intraocular pressure at this point, if the other factors don't change, is going to be the intraocular pressure of the eye. So if the flow at one point stops, and though you are not measuring the intraocular pressure, you are judging the tension, what I'm doing here is just letting the iris depositor fall onto the cornea. And from experience, I have learned that if the iris depositor there without any external force that is pressing onto the cornea can cause an indentation, but no folds, but does not require any force to form that indentation, that is a pressure of something between 10 to 14. That is where you want to land. And this can help you eliminate hypotony from your practice. And it is much easier to prevent and tackle high pressures, especially if you use multiple releasables. I in a standard manner use 2 releasables now. And this thing from Dr. Paul Palmberg from Bascom Palmer has helped me almost eliminate hypotony from my practice. Yes, slow is good, always, but not while you're writing your exam. Now, the technique for suturing with 10-0 nylon and 8-0 Vicryl is different. If you use wing sutures which are not buried and leave the 10-0 nylon, it becomes very uncomfortable for the patient. I was with a consultant as a resident who used to use 10-0 nylon, and I did not like sutures which are exposed. So even Vicryl, though it's a very soft suture, I bury it under conjunctiva, and there's a huge difference in the amount of comfort that the patient is going to have. So if you use 10-0 nylon, you need to use the Moorfields technique available over the internet very clearly. Okay, how much mannitol do you give? It depends on the intraocular pressure. Something like 1 milligram per kg body, 1 gram per kg body weight is what I typically use. And I give 1 hour prior to surgery. I make sure that the eye is soft when I'm taking the patient into the operation theater. And just make sure that it happens. It typically would take somewhere between half an hour to 1 hour. Some patients where the intraocular pressure is higher, I also give something like 150 to 200, 250 ml if the eye does not become soft. I don't want to go into an eye that is hard and cause a sudden decompression. I think that's a very major risk factor for wipeout, suprachoroidal hemorrhage, choroidals. So if we can avoid and prevent that, nothing better than that. Mitomycin is not available. Oh. So there are situations where I could not use mitomycin, such as a patient with very thin sclera, typically, or a patient who has very bad uveitis. You don't want to use mitomycin for the risk of hypotony. I have used amniotic membrane in such cases. So that has helped. I think we can discuss in a later place about how to use amniotic membrane. You can also reach out to me. My details are available on the CyberSight website. Yes, the dissection has to be below the subtenon space. So if you remember when I was discussing the peritomy or the conjunctival opening, I was pointing out the fact that you must go and incise the tenons. You cannot be between tenons and conjunctiva. That space will close very fast. When do you prefer trabeculectomy over deep sclerectomy? There are multiple surgeons that I keep speaking to. I have not. I'll tell you what. I'm not well versed with this technique of deep sclerectomy, so not something that I can comment on. Which instrument under the scleral flap do you use? I use an MVR blade. Okay, in children or young adults, the tenons are very thick, and while closing the cons, tenons tend to prolapse out. Okay, tenons should not prolapse out, because tenons, if they prolapse out, it can be a conduit to the external environment with the aqueous lake or the bleb that you have. And I think that you have to prevent by taking care that if you don't manhandle or pull the tenons too much, just make sure that you push it in before closing the conjunctiva. Even if it has prolapsed out, make sure that you push it in before you close the conjunctiva. 0.2 ml subconj mitomycin before peritomy can be used routinely if the conj or sclera is not too thin. Subconj application during intraoperative, I'm a little conservative. For me, 0.04% of 4 mg per ml is working very fine. I have not had problems. So I would use mitomycin to the minimum extent possible. First day post-op, I think we'll leave this question probably for another forum. Anti-glaucoma eye drops to be stopped or no? I was just saying that you should get the best possible intraocular pressure before the surgery, so that the extent of hypotony, so a pressure drop from 40 to 10, imagine how different it would be from 20 to 10. And as far as the washout period and of the medications is concerned, most intraocular pressure reducing drugs have a washout period of almost a month. So stopping it for 1 week may not really help you, but only increase the chances of complications. Removal of releasable sutures. One I now release at 2 weeks, others only if there is a need. How to decide whether to perform bleb revision or repeat trab? Anything early, a needling is the answer. Anything late, you have to look at how the trabeculectomy was behaving in that eye. A trabeculectomy that failed very fast in an eye means that there are risk factors if you can't find any fault with your technique for that surgery. So document your surgery very carefully. What you did you do anything different for that eye that may have been a risk factor? Did you observe anything post-operatively that was a risk factor? I think if the first trab has worked quite well for a long time, I would go for a repeat trab. Later bleb revisions in the longer term, I am not a very big fan of that. I would do a needling in the first 2 to 3 months. MMC I use after the scleral flap. I definitely use homatropin in post-operative period. I have seen in our population, I am from India, the prevalence of angle closure is very high. The iris is very pigmented. If I don't use homatropin, I see a lot of pigment dispersion. The amount of flare that you will note with and without a strong cycloplasia will be significant. Not atropine, I don't think that is required, and allergy to the atropine formulations that we have in our country is very common. So I use homatropin in the post-operative period. Okay, Kelly punch, without Kelly punch, if you want to make a scleral incision that is not reaching the limbus, you have to use Kelly punch. For the situations when you don't have a Kelly punch, I use an MVR to create that window. So I wish I had the time to share that video, but basically make sure that the anterior chamber is well formed, hold the edge of the scleral incision, either retract the flap with a suture or ask your assistant to do that with an instrument, and then gradually mark the opening or the ostium going from inside out. If you go from upward down, you are likely to cause a sudden shallowing. But if you are going from the sclera towards the cornea, down to up, inside to out, you are likely to create a partial thickness ostium that gradually becomes full thickness. Intraocular xylocaine before iridectomy, no, I don't use. With the subconj anesthesia that I use, I have never had a patient complaining of pain with the iridectomy. Shape, I think I have already answered the shape of the flap. Control the IOP after surgery. You have to look at the cause, why the intraocular pressure is raised. The intraocular pressure can be raised because of problems at 3 levels. Either the ostium is blocked, so you have to tackle with that. or the scleral flap is no longer has the subscleral lake, aqueous lake because of tight sutures, then you go to do suturolysis or releasing the releasable. If it's late and that has not worked, probably a needling to raise the scleral flap. If it's subconjunctival fibrosis, increasing steroids, doing a needling, using 5-FU injections can be the general guideline. Or let me just be very clear on this. If the subconjunctival space shows fibrosis, the height of the bleb is decreasing, and you see a lot of vascularity, increase the steroids, use bleb massage to keep the bleb formed. A bleb that you can keep formed for 6 weeks is likely to stay that way for a very, very long time. So repeated massage, frequent follow-up. If you see the patient at 1 week and see the patient at 6 weeks, then the opportunity is gone. In such patients, you have to do a more frequent follow-up and tackle depending on the cause. Shallow anterior chamber during surgery, correct. So I make a paracentesis exactly for that reason. A shallow anterior chamber is not a problem in itself, but it can be a precursor to aqueous misdirection or malignant glaucoma, precursor to suprachoroidal hemorrhage, choroidal detachment. So that is why I don't like this situation, and I make a paracentesis and reform the AC. If you don't make a paracentesis, you can use the ostium and the flap itself to reform the anterior chamber. I don't like a shallow anterior chamber either intraoperatively or postoperatively. Yes, we do have an international fellowship program. You can approach our website for that. Okay, while washing the mitomycin with the conj, okay, this is a great one. And that used to be a problem. So this will not happen if you don't use the cannula. If you don't use the cannula and go under the flap and you use the hub of the syringe only, this will not happen. The hydration of the tenons. And make sure that you use a forceful 30 ml irrigation that is going right up to the posterior most part of the area that you have dissected. Where do you exactly get the rotational grip? It is in the posterior subtenon space where you would see some thick tenons and sclera that is still adherent to each other, typically near the superior rectus, and you can go and grab that and do away with need for any traction suture. Trim thick tenon, I am not very comfortable, though. When I was in Africa for a very short time, I was very surprised to see the amount of tenons that I saw there. And when we have many patients visiting from Africa, the tenons thickness, I think it varies from race to race. Though I was a little worried about leaving tenons in such patients and young patients initially, but I don't think they affected the outcome over the long term at all. So I just leave as much tissue as the nature wanted there to be, with do minimum that you need to do. So no tenonectomy for me. Mydriaticum eye drop. Mydriaticum is what drug? If it's something that causes mydriasis, I do put a drop of hometropin at the end of the surgery. Initiation of scleral flap, if we say we entered too deep and see uveal tissue, how do we proceed? Excellent question. What we will need to do in that case is one thing, judge the expertise of the surgeon. If you have done scleral tear suturing earlier, what I would do in this situation is one, not use mitomycin. Mitomycin going into the suprachoroidal space is very dangerous. I would just create a flap above the present flap and suture the initial. So you will have 3 layers, the scleral bed, the flap that you have, the bottom of which you started initially, and then a flap that you had created. So the bottom flap should be sutured to the bed, and you can proceed with the surgery if you have the patience and the skill to do that. What is Ologen implant? If you have, for the previous question, if you have any doubt, just close it. It's not worth the risk, because suprachoroidal space is not a space that an anterior segment per surgeon should be routinely dealing with. Ologen, I think multiple textbooks can answer that question. Early failed trap, what is the frequency and duration of? So once again, we have to look at the cause of failure of trabeculectomy. So steroid response can be a cause, but you have to exclude all other causes before calling it a top steroid response. So if there is inflammation, subconjunctival fibrosis, more steroids are required. If you see raised intraocular pressure in both eyes, other eye being on same medications as preoperatively, good bleb with raised pressure, then it can be a steroid response. Then you need to change it to a low potency steroid, and then reduce the frequency also. Use of visco with trab. I know many surgeons like to do that, but when viscoelastic remains in the eye after the cataract surgery, we call it pro-fibrotic or inflammatory. I am not someone who is in favor of using viscoelastics with trab. Just titrate your flaps well, and you will not need. How long is that visco going to remain in the eye? What happens when the visco is absorbed? Then you're going to get hypotony, right? So if your flap is good and you have taken care of titrating it well, you won't need to leave viscoelastic in the eye. Follow-up protocol, I think we can have a class on that. We can have a full session webinar on that. How do you perform trabeculectomy in a case of very deep set? I know. So difficult situations are difficult for everyone, and I think it's just a matter of time before you get used to it. That is a situation where I would like to take a corneal traction suture, so I have a good exposure. I can turn the eye downwards and have good exposure. Premature entry, I think I'll just leave that. That's a very good question, but you can reach me out. You can find my email ID on the CyberSight website. We can discuss it there. No, I don't remove tenons even when it is thick. Do you perform combined SICS trab at the same settings or after some time? So if there is a pre-existing cataract, I would like to tackle the cataract at the same time. If I do trabeculectomy only for situations where either the patient is pseudophakic already or does not have trab, does not have a significant cataract. If there is a cataract, just go ahead and do a combined surgery. Phacotrab is something that I prefer, but very frequently we need to do an SICS trab also when the cataract is very hard or a mature cataract. So then I think SICS in my hands, I am friendlier to the endothelium. Post-op hypotony does not require resuturing. The requirement for resuturing is bleb leak. Or are you talking about the scleral flap? If you titrate, you won't need this. So titrate your flaps. Now, why do you want air or visco in the eye? So they are both going to get out of the eye after a while. So titrate your flaps. You don't need anything, either air or visco, that is not going to remain in the eye for a longer time. How do you prepare a patient with an acute attack of glaucoma? So basically, you're talking about acute angle closure. Now, acute angle closure, there is a huge body of evidence that is gathering that if there is no disc change that you see, it means that it is not an acute or chronic glaucoma. It's a de novo acute angle closure. you probably will do better if you do you do a cataract surgery or a clear lens extraction. Jury is, if not everybody agrees with it, but that is what I do if the medical control is not possible. Doing it earlier gives better results. So probably within a month, which should be enough time for you to understand whether the medical therapy is going to work or not. AC shallowing when doing sclerostomy with telepunch. No, that is the only time when you enter the eye and when you are making the ostium, the intraocular pressure in the eye is going to be close to zero, if not zero. So it's very important to reduce the duration of that zero intraocular pressure by doing a paracentesis, by using pre-placed sutures. So AC will shallow during, no matter how you make the ostium, how you do the incision, you are going to see a very shallow AC with intraocular pressure close to zero. Pterygium. I don't do pterygium surgeries, but when I was doing, I was doing an extensive removal. Accidentally torn. It will depend on flap is accidentally torn. Okay. It will depend on where it is torn. If you can't suture it, you will need to put a lamellar thickness scleral patch graft over it, because if the scleral flap is torn, that will cause very bad hypotony if it's leaking. So it will also depend on whether that tear is anterior or posterior, but any major tear will need a scleral flap or a scleral patch graft, a lamellar thickness over the flap that you have made originally. Congenital glaucoma should be operated as soon as possible. You should not wait for any duration in a patient who has congenital glaucoma. It's a surgical disease. Only in very few cases you can succeed medically. This is what we see here. I know for sure that there are areas in the world where you see milder cases of congenital glaucoma, but do not wait if medical therapy has not worked. It is it causes irreversible damage in terms of the enlarging the globe, increasing the axial length, and the more corneal haze you have, more densely emblyopic the eye is likely to become, especially if it's unilateral. Don't wait. It is a surgical disease. Again, my pleasure if I could be of any help. So I'm sorry I've taken a lot more time than I I was allowed, but I had kept time for questions. Okay. SICS trab will have to be single site. If you want to make a 5 to 6 millimeter incision, I will make a linear around 5.5 to 6 millimeter incision, and then perform trab with a slightly different technique. I prefer to do a twin site phaco trab whenever possible. So my incision would be superior trab and temporal incision for the phaco, a twin site. How high IOP is safe to do a trab? What is the IOP? Still 50. Look, we are doing a trab because IOP is not coming down with whatever medications are available. So you try to reduce it maximally by giving topical and oral medications on a chronic basis. If it doesn't come down, giving glycerol and mannitol once or twice, 2-3 days before the surgery sometimes helps. If nothing is possible, you just have to bite the bullet, pray to your God, your patient's God, and hope nothing goes wrong. But that is a situation that is very precarious. Very often you get away, but that seems to be a situation where you can have complications like choroidal detachment, suprachoroidal aqueous misdirection, especially if it's angle closure. Thank you so much for joining. What do you do first in combined surgery? Okay. I think we will make this the last question. So for a combined surgery, when I do a phaco trab, I make the flap and then shift to the temporal phaco. So superiorly, the trap will proceed exactly the way I had showed you till I have made the flap, perform and complete the temporal phaco, come back and complete the trap, the remaining part of trap exactly like I showed you. So the technique of trap in a twin side trap does not change at all. Thank you so much.